With the help of Hashem, we are learning Sanhedrin Daf Samach Zayin to acknowledge and to thank God that we have the schus to be learning this daf, which is actually the final daf that we are learning to get uploaded on Chabad.org. We will thus complete Davar Sholem, the 2,711 dafim, and we're learning it Al Yad Ha'oil, and I would like to dedicate this class to my dear wife, Steri. So, like this, we are continuing the Mishnah from Daf Nun Gimel. The Mishnah is speaking about all the different violations for which someone is chayiv skila. We left off by Meses Madiach Machashiv, which will be the topic of Daf Samach Zayin, even though the Mishnah Nun Gimel continues with the Ben Soired Umayre, but that's actually going to be the next chapter. Now, Meses, which means someone who instigates another or others to serve Avodah Zarah, chayiv skila, as we'll see over here. Meses has a very unique din. Normally, before someone does something wrong, we forewarn that person because we would actually want for that person not to do the violation. Meses is the only sin for which we are even allowed to trick a person when we know that he's trying to instigate others, the missionaries for Yashker or for any other Avodah Zarah. It's an Ian to trick them to make sure that there are Eidim in order for that person to be put to death in court. That's Meses. Madiach, as we'll learn, the subverter is someone who's also instigating others, but the others turn out to be the majority of the city. So it's not about one versus many. One and many can still be Meses in the parsha of Meses, but the moment the person who was instigating succeeded in getting the majority of the inhabitants of a city to serve Avodah Zarah, then that falls in the other parsha of a Madiach, which we'll call in English a subverter, and actually we'll see various machloikesin regarding what their punishment is. We're going to move on to the final one of today. It's going to be very interesting regarding a sorcerer, a black magician, or a machashev. We're going to see there's a machloikes tanoim between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Akiva and others. What exactly is the chiyuv for a person who's a machashev? Rabbi Yossi say that he's chayiv l'sayif. It's Rabbi Akiva that holds that he's chayiv skila. Here will be the ground zero where we discover, number one, Rabbi Yehuda is the Tana that is not doidish smuchim. Just because two things are juxtaposed, he does not accept for that to be a source of a limud. And more importantly, every time you learn throughout Shas that there are those who hold that even when you have shnik suvim habayim ke'echad, we spoke about this yesterday. So normally the rule is shnik suvim habayim ke'echad ein malandim. Then the Gemara sometimes says, Halich lemando amar ein malandim, lemando amar malandim. Who is the mando amar that holds that? Even if the Torah repeats the same din regarding two different cases, still, we can use them to teach for other cases. This is not the tzad hashava, but this is even that you can argue, if you can learn it from one, why did Hashem have to repeat it twice? And the logic will be, dafka by those two. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't agree to that logic. Rabbi Yehuda holds only if it's written three times, then ein malandim. And that, but the Gemara never says who is that Tana. It's going to be the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda. And for the remaining of the daf, we're going to have unbelievable stories of Kishuv. We're going to learn that there is Kishuv that's done through a demon, through Shadim, Maisa Shadim, which is a lesser form of Kishuv. There is a higher level of Kishuv that's done without the help of demons. Maisa Chshafim, we're going to interpret what does Kishuv mean, where does the word come from, that your Makchish, Pamalia, Shalmaila, Kishuv, Makchish, the pay in this is Pamalia, and a lot of Pichasidis, what that means, and the antidote to Kishuv is the belief of Einoid Movadoi. Actually, there are people that understand from our Gemara, and we have such a story from Brazil. There was a Meshulach that used to stay by my parents that went to the north of Brazil, and he came and he said that he was put under a spell of Kishuv. Elamai, he remembered Sanhedrin Samach Zayin, and he said, Hashem Elokim Einoid Movadoi, and the koyach of the Kishuv went away. The story of Rav Shmuel Munkish that challenged the Machashev, that the Machashiv gave Rab Shmuel something to drink and he made a bracha shahakal and then he gave something. All of that is in Sanhedrin Samach Zayin and much, much more. So without any further ado, Chevra, Daf Samach Zayin on top of the Amid, beginning with the Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, Hamesis, a instigator, meaning someone who is instigating others to serve any type of idol worship. Says the Mishnah, two dinim. Number one is Zehedyet, that we're speaking about a common person who's doing the instigating, says Rashi and Tapar Amid, not a prophet. We'll see, really, that's subject to a machlekes tanoim. But according to the way we're understanding the Mishnah right now, a Navi that comes in the name of God, and he tells another to serve an avodah zarah, he's going to be chayiv chenek. So that's the hedyet, a non-Navi who's doing the instigating. And number two, v'hamesis es ha-hedyet, and he's instigating a hedyet, and not what, and not the majority of the city. Because if he were to instigate the majority of the city, again, Rashi writes over here, then that person would be chayiv chenek. And here we're speaking specifically about chiyuv skila. Now, what exactly is this instigator saying? There's one rule. He has to initiate the conversation. So Omar, if he says to one or to few or to as long as not the majority of a city, yesh yira, yira means a deity. I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining is because if you want to see something that's not true, over there it's great. When you tell a person that the church down the block is amazing, they'll know it's not true. So this is just the way people will do it. They're in a faraway place. There is a meter. You go to the Hindus or you go to India. Wow, there's the guru, and this is kafei cheles. That's how the avodah zarah eats, and that's how the avodah zarah drinks. And he has to give a reason why it's worthwhile to worship it. If you'll do X, Y, and Z, you'll bring it shalent. It's going to do good for you. If you don't worship it, it's going to do bad for you. In other words, if you don't give more details when you're selling the idol, that's not called a mesis. Not just saying, you have the Church of Scientology. No, you begin saying, no, it does this, and it's going to help you. Once you begin explaining the advantage and the negative, that's called the mesis. Now, says the Mishnah, the rule, whoever that will be punished in a human court, minim aleim. You may not trick them, right? You may not do something to trap them. However, chutz mizu, this is the exception. Like we spoke out in the intro, like all other people, violators, you give them a forewarning in order for them not to do it. Here you're giving them. Here you're not only not giving a forewarning, we're going to trap him. How? So like this: if the maces is speaking to two people, he doesn't have to be trapped. Hasra is not needed. You have to have two witnesses speaking to the court. But if the maces was attempting to instigate two people, done. That means and that's the end. And they bring him to court, and he's chayiv steal. However, what happens if the instigator is only speaking to one? So there's no Eidim, but you have to have Eidim. So who Oimar, the one, the Nisas, should tell the maces, ooh, that's great, but you know what? I have Chavedim, Ishli Chavedim. They also Broitze Bekach. Now, when he brings the Chavedim, let that guy, he'll sell the same spiel again. But what happens in Arum here means he's clever. The maces is afraid to do this in front of two witnesses. He knows that maybe he's being trapped. So machminim means we arrange. Machminim lo yedim. We arrange for two witnesses to come behind the fence. In other words, the maces is not aware. This is trapping. Entrapping. That's the only time we can entrap in Yiddishkeit. And here's the thing. Guys, a maces is only chayiv if he initiates. Here, if the Nisos brought chavedim, the maces will begin the same talk again. Here, he's only speaking to one. He already told him the whole thing. So here, the Nisos has to begin. Problem is, once the Nisos begins the conversation, then the maces is not the initiator. So that's why in our case, there's going to have to be a back and forth and a back and forth. Only over here. So first of all, the Nisos tells the maces, tell me what you were telling me before. When we were, over there in private. And now the maces repeats it, but again, here the downside is that when Adam were witnessing, he did not begin it, he did not initiate it. So what's the solution for that? What's the solution in order to trap him? The first white line, so the Nisos tells the maces, what are you talking about? Why should we abandon our God, the only God in heaven, that we should go and worship Eitzim, the Avanim? Push back. Now, you never know. The Nisas could be successful. The Mesis is a Hayib. So if he retracted, he says, you know what, you're right, then mutter, then nothing will happen to him. Even though Adam heard him speaking about worshiping idols, but it began with the potential Nisas starting the conversation. But if he responds, now this is like he's reinitiating. No, this is our obligation. Or it's good for us. Then the people that were hiding behind the fence, they bring him to Bezdin, the Soiklin Oisan, and he's put to death by stoning. Another detail in the Mishnah regarding the maces. If the maces begins the conversation by saying, I'm going to go and worship, the Ran adds, he must add the words, and why don't you come with me? But that's one expression that is included in the parsha of the maces. Or he says right away, Eilech ve'evoid. I'm going to go and I'm going to worship. What's the difference between these two? We spoke it out a few days ago. One time the idol is there. I'm worshiping it. Or if the idol is far away, he begins by saying, I'm going to go over there and worship it, but he has to add the words, and why don't you come and join me? Or, Neilach v'navid, let us go and worship. Now, as we had in the Mishnah of Samach Hamad Beis, that when it comes to the following four, even if that avodah zarah is not worshipped with the following four, it's shaloi kedarka, you will always be chayiv. So the first case of navoid is about darka, as we explained. And now we go even to shaloi kedarka, that he says, azabeach, I'm going to go slaughter something to the idol, or elech v'azabeach, you have to know Ibra here, or neilech v'nizbach, or acted, elech v'acted, neilech v'nacted, anasech, elech v'anasech, neilech v'nansech. Fourth is ishtachava, so slaughtering, burning, pouring, which includes blood avodah, and bowing all to an idol, ishtachava, or elech v'ishtachva, neilech v'nishtachva, and all of these cases, even though shloi kedarka, that is a mason. Mara points out the following problem we have in the Reisha. The Reisha began with two statements. Number one, hamesis zehedyet, and number two, hamesis esohedyet, as we quoted Rashi's explanation. Here, the Gemara asks on the above. Hames is a hedit, right? Taima the hedit. Mamash what Rashi says, Han Navi. In other words, the Mishnah is implying that if you would have had a Navi doing the instigating, oh, then it's a different parsha. Also, it's its own parsha Sli'ei, but then Bechenek. Next case, the Hames is Esa hedit, which means that why is there skila? Because he only convinced Yachid. Yachid doesn't mean one. Yachid means not the Rov of the city. But if he would have convinced the majority of the city, then Bechenek. Now, that's great as long as our Mishnah only is following the Shita of Rabbi Shimon. So Masnis Samani, Rab Shimoni. The time as we learned in Abraisa, Navi Shehidiach, the skila, the Chachamim hold that a Navi, like a Meses, it's Rab Shimon that says Bechenek. Next in Madich Iranidachas Beskila, Rab Shimon Bechenek. So in other words, the Reisha follows, Reisha meaning our mission, follows Rab Shimon. Problem is Ema Seifa, the Seifa by us happens to be the next Mishnah on Samach Zayin, but not the one that we didn't learn yet. What's the next Mishnah? Hamadiach. Now the Mishnah is continuing. Mishnah Daf Nun Gimel Skila. And he got the Rov of the city. And the next mission is about the parsha of making a city into a Ir Hanidachas. Problem is Asan Rabbanon, because according to Rab Shimon it should be Bechenek. So Reisha, Rab Shimon, the Seifa, the Rabbanon, and many times the Gemara says, yeah. But here we're going to say no. We're going to work it out. But don't forget that we have to work out the first clause in the Mishnah and the second clause in the Mishnah. Line number one, line number two. And interestingly, Ravina and Papa, who are not arguing, each one is resolving. Rashi explains another line in the Mishnah. Ravina is focusing on the first line in the Mishnah on the top. Hames is the headed. What did we say? That implies that if a Navi would have been the Maces, it would have been the Chenek, right? That's Rab Shimon. Says, Ravina Amar Kul Rabbanani, and Zu Aflei Zu Ktani. No, our Mishnah can also be the Chachamim. And if a Navi does it, he's also going to be Chayiv Skila. The way the Mishnah formulates itself is by writing that Sai, if you're a commoner, and even if you're a Navi, you're also going to be Chayiv. But that only resolves the first line on top of our own. What about Hameses as a Hedyet? And what did that imply? That the moment you got the Roiv over here, then you're not going to be Chayiv Skila. But that's not the Chachamim. So the Papa is answering that. Papa Amar, keep Tani Meses a Hedyet. Right? And you're making this understanding, and not the right. No, he means that lahachmana, we treat him like a commoner. We're not at all speaking about how many people did he convince. What he's trying to emphasize is that even if the one doing the instigating was prior to this moment known as a prophet, even to him, you treat him like a commoner, you trap him. Trapping someone is something very disrespectful. So Gavaldik, so it's a whole new understanding in the Mishnah in order not to have Reish Rab Shimon, the Sefer the Rabban.
That's in the second line?
That's in the second line. That no matter who the Meses is, look inside second line of the Amid. No matter who he is, that means even if he's a Navi, you treat him like a commoner, meaning trap him. And Chavra, it's amazing. This is the only mitzvah from the old Taryag mitzvahs that we are out to trap someone. Mamash, the only exception. There's no other exception. When it comes to all of the other people that potentially can be chayiv misa, ein machminin aleim. The word machminin means to arrange, but it means you're arranging witnesses without their knowledge. Right? In English, it's called entrapment, right? Chutz mizu. And here the Braisa gives even more details. That Ketzad, oiseloi, madlikin lo yasaner, b'bayis haknimi. This Maces understands that if other Jews will hear him trying to proselytize, it's a capital crime. So they hide. So make sure he feels comfortable. Make sure he's inside some inner room. It's dark. Make sure it's well lit up. You're doing all this for the Maces to be comfortable to say what he really has in his mind. But the witnesses are in the outer room. Why do they have to be that close? Let them go farther away. Because witnesses not only have to hear his voice, witnesses have to see him. Yeah, witnesses have to see him. So the witnesses hearing the voice is not enough. How does a man know he's with his wife if it's dark? Because he hears a voice. The Gemara says that. But whenever you need a din of edus, you have to see. Even if you hear and you recognize the voice, if you're there as an aid, you have to see and hear. And make sure that he doesn't see the witnesses. Trap him, even though he's a Navi, no matter who he is. And again, the Braisa is repeating what you have in the Mishnah. Tell me what you told me in private. And since now, while Eidim are seeing and hearing, he did not initiate. That's why, again, only here. So you have to push back, and you have to have the Maces rebut the pushback. Even when we're trapping, we don't want him to be trapped. We want him to do tshuva. But if he responds, no, kachi chayvur, God forbid, kachi afalonu, then ha'edim shoshamin libachutz. Now we flow into the next, as we're learning.
So it sounds like you need two Edom behind and not one plus the guy who he's talking to.
Not one plus the one that he's talking to. No, it's not true, because the Mishnah said that if he is trying to be Maces, two, they can be the Edom.
Right, but one hiding and one talking.
Yeah, but you're putting up a question. I don't know.
The Mishnah,
I'll tell you why.
Maybe the Edom were hiding.
Yeah. And not him. The question is, why do you have to bring two aid, and why can't you bring just one aid? That's your question. So maybe here again, because since in this case, the initiator is the Nisas, he cannot be included. You have to exclude him. Okay, next Mishnah. Hamadiyah. In English, a subverter. It's the same concept. Someone is trying to get others, but he's trying to subvert a whole city. Now, in the Mishnah by the Maces, he's speaking B'lashon Yachid or B'lashon Am. A Mediach has to speak always in the plural. Well, if someone tried to convince one, and God forbid, he convinced the whole city, he's also not a Mediach. He has to go after a city and get to the most of them. Hamadiach, it's foreign to us. Goyim are doing this to us for thousands of years. Mamish, and they're the trappers. They dress like Eden now. It's a terrible thing with the missionaries, and their mission is to trick us into serving Avodah Zarah, which is Christianity or other Narishkeit. Hamadiach, says the Mishnah, that's the emphasis. In other words, it's not only that he affected the majority of the city, that the words that he is using is in plural for a group. Now, the final one of this Vedic, Hamachashev, it's going to be a fascinating stuff. A black magician, a sorcerer. So like this, our Mishnah is following the Shita that holds Yechayiv Skila, as we spoke on in the introduction. Big machlok is Tanoim. But it's only if someone did something and not what, but the loy ha'oiches esoinayim. If someone creates an illusion, then he won't be chayiv skila. He will be violating a lav midoiraisa. Now we spoke this out 2 daf ago. We're going to learn Gemara Rashi. Rashi holds that a illusionist is a biblical violation. We already spoke out that we are lenient. There are other ways of understanding these sugis, but again, we're learning Gemara Rashi. Rashi writes clearly, ha'oiches esoanayim is someone who does a magic trick. He makes you think he did something. So the Mishnah says he's not chayiv skila, but it's a biblical violation. Okay. All right. He won't be chayiv malchus because he didn't do anything. Maybe lav she'ein by ma'aseh. Maybe if he did a ma'aseh to trick you, then he will be chayiv malchus. Yeah. Again, there's other opinions. We just spoke out that the best way halacha l'ma'aseh of doing a magic show, not that it's so good to do it, is by articulating to the people that are watching that all this is just an illusion. It's a sleight of the hand. Many poskim are more lenient. They say that nowadays there's less koyach in kedusha, and therefore there's less koyach by the goyim in tumah. There's less kishuv practice now, so no one even thinks that it's really happening. And therefore, you don't even have to say that. Others hold, not only do you have to say it, but the entertainer has to first make a trick and show everyone how he did it. So everyone will see that whatever he's doing is not Ashkai, is Achiza Sinai. And therefore, now again, our Mishnah Rashi, is making a sleight of hand, a illusion is asur d'oraisa, but you're not chayiv skila. One of the common tricks, all we're going to see about cutting people in pieces, all of the narishkeit, these were going on for thousands of years. They had the same tricks. So one trick is that they would go into a cucumber field, and it would look like, without them gathering the cucumbers were getting gathered on their own. Now, certain people actually practice sorcery. Certain people have the ability of making you think that they gathered the cucumbers, whether they hypnotized you or however they did it. So says Rabbi Akiva, now that we established that ha'oiches esoinayim is a violation, a biblical violation for which there's no chiyuv, skila, in the name of Rabbi Yeshua, by bazoi shnayim loitin kishuim, you can have 2 people gathering cucumbers magically, echad loike, and he'll be parted from being stoned to death. And one will be gathering the cucumbers and he'll be chayiv. Which one? The one who actually used the powers of sorcery and the cucumbers gathered. He's going to be chayiv skila. And since he really gathered nothing, that's Rashi. It looks to you like he did something, right? He bent the spoon. All these things, he's violating the Isur D'Oraisa, but you're not going to be chayiv skila. Okay, so first of all, going back to the first part of the Mishnah, to the Madiach, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Rav, Madichai Ir Hanidachas Shanu Kan. See, the Mishnah didn't say the words Ir Hanid. The Mishnah just said that the Madiach has to speak in the plural. But he's adding, and he has to succeed in getting the majority, because if he succeeded, God forbid, in getting other Yidden to follow idols, but he didn't get the roiv of that city, then it would be a masis. and he won't be a Madiyah with all of the nafkaminas. Now, Hamachashev, and that will be the topic until the end of today's daf. Hamachashev, Zeho Oisa Maisa Vechulein. So, Tom and Abana and Chevron Parshas Mishpat, and it says, Mechashefa Loisachaya. Don't allow a sorceress to live. So you would think, since the Torah uses the female lashon, that we're only speaking about women. No, echad to ish, the echad to isha. Not a male nor a female, nor a man nor a woman are allowed to practice sorcery. In case why not also machashev? And Bechlal, the Torah generally speaks to the male gender, and women are included in the men, but to have something, explicit in the female gender is really a anomaly. Answer is because most who are engaged in sorcery are de facto women. There you go.
Translation is most of the machshafim are women.
Most who are engaged in a society, those who are engaged in sorcery, the majority of those people will be women. All right, now the question is, Misas and B'ma'am. You're learning Misas, are you kidding? We're learning Avraham Zajac, we're learning Sanhedrin in the Sugi of Skila. I know that. But the Gemara wants you to know that not everyone agrees with our mission, that you're Chayiv Skila. Let's go. Rabbi Avraham Zajac says, don't forget, the Torah doesn't say at all what the punishment is. It says, in Mishpatim Mechashef V'Loisachayim, and now we're jumping here's from Chumash Shemais to Chumash Devarim to Parsha Shoiftim. There, the Torah is speaking about the war that we waged against the 7 nations. And the Torah writes, Loi Sechaya Kol Neshama. Now, how did we kill those nations? We killed them B'Sayif. Where do we find that? Dashi quotes, because when Moshe Rabbeinu engaged in the battle against Sichon and Og, I know they're not part of the 7 nations. But there it says that we killed them Lifi Charev. So from there we understand logically that when we went into the Holy Land and we waged war, we killed them with the Sayed. So you have Loi Sechaya and you have Loi Sechaya. Same words. Malahalim B'Sayif, Afkan B'Sayif. Oh, not like our mission. Comes along Rabbi Akiva and he says, and he's jumping back one parsha from Mishpatim back to Israel. What does it say by Yisrael that when we made that fence around Har Sinai, in Behema, in Ish, Lo Yichya. Now, what were to happen if someone would breach that barrier and would have gone up on Mount Sinai? Malahalam Beskila, says Rashi, because it says in Yisrael, Befedish, Sokoil, Yisokoil, Befedish, there the punishment is Skila. So, Lo Yichya, Lo Sechaya, the words are not exactly the same, but Afkan, the skilo. So Amalei Rabbi Yosi to Rabbi Akiva, 1 second. Ani Danti, I made my Gzeira Shavam from a more precise comparison, right? Loisachaya. No, if you would have found another Loisachaya with skila male, you only found the source where it says Lo Yichya. Now, guys, appreciate that this is female, this is male. I know that. First of all, even by the 7 nations, Loisachaya called Neshama, because Neshama is female. Say that. And we made it clear that Echad Ish Echad Isha, but it's not exactly the same. So Amar Loi Rabbi Akiva, no, my comparison is better than yours. And he gives them the following logic. You're right that if you only focus on the word, yours is better. But the context and the logic, mine is correct. Ani Danti Yisrael mi Yisrael. God told the Yidden not to, until the Mashiach HaYovel, not to go up the mountain. So God was giving a commandment to Yidden. Guys, by Yidden, we find Arba Misos. That's the name of the Pedic. Skila, Sreifa, Herek, and Chenek. By Goyim, for the Sheva Mitzvahs, they only get Herek. They only get Saif. So therefore, he says, I'm learning a case from a Jew, from another case from a Jew. And since we find that the Torah singled out in Parshas Yisrael from the 4, the words Lo Yichya means one of the 4, which is Skila. So here, Lo Sechaya means Skila. But the Atodanta, you're learning it from where? From Lo Sechaya Kol Neshama. Of course, the Goyim are going to get killed B'Sayif. The fact that they are killed B'Sayif is not a good teacher to the Yidden where we have other options. Danti so Kichavim, Shaloim because of Elo, Dafsamach Zayin with base, Misa Achas. Okay, now the Braisa is adding other Tanoim that took part in this debate. And Azai says that when it says in Mishpatim, Mechashefam, Loisechaya, and it says next verse, Mamish, a person who commits an act of bestiality, moist yumas. Now, how is that person moist yumas? So we know that since the Torah uses the words dam of boy, demei and bam, so we know that it means skila. Now, samchu inyan lari, that's called doirish and smuchim. The fact that God put two different mitzvahs that are not related, one juxtaposed to the other, ma to tell you, ma sheikh b'mehema b'skila. Again, like we quoted the Meim Bam, Dam of Boy, Af Mechashe B'skilom. Amaloi Rebbe Yehuda, I reject this Derech Halimut. That's called Doishin Smuchim, or Ein Doishin Smuchim. V'chim Yipnei Shesamcho Inyan Loi Noitzil Azeh B'skila. Right? I'll tell you more than that. No, it's just to give I want to just give a little bit of a background over here. There's Taka Machloikis, whether Skila Sreifa, which one is more common. But here we're having a question whether Skila or Saif. Hereg and Chenek are the less chum. When God says to do something and we don't know, because God did not write explicitly what it is, the default is to go to the less serious. We don't by default, by punishment, go to the bigger serious. Because it's not enough. It's not enough. I'm saying that because maybe if the question would have been between Sreif and Skila, maybe he would be Doirish. He's saying you can't say that. We don't know anything, and you're coming from the Smichos, we can't learn it. Ella, Rabbi Yehuda has enough. It's amazing. Rabbi Akiva also had a limit. No one is going to his limit, maybe because they want the words, because they didn't find it precise enough. Right? Ella says Rabbi Yehuda, what we learned, Mamish, the last sugya, Oiven Yedoini. The Torah prohibits us practicing sorcery, wizardry, witchcraft. And the Torah specifies, as we just learned, the specific practice of Oiv, the practice of Yudaini. Like we mentioned, these are not idol worship practices, but they fall in the general umbrella of sorcery. And here's Akasha. Why did Hashem B'chal have to forbid Oiv? Torah says, don't do Kishuv. Menachesh Machashev. There's a Hazara. Then you have the punishment, Machashev V'lo Yisechayim. And we would have known that you can't practice Oiv and Yudaini and Doyer Shalom Eis. This is the 8th principle that we say every morning from Rabbi Shmuel Eimer, that called the Shmoy B'chlal. The Yotzim in our Klal, and God gives an example. Why does God give an example? Not only to teach you something about that example, Ella al Klal Kula Yotzim. Well, it's by Oiv and Yudaini, we know the Chayv Skila, we had the main bomb. No, I think it says Befeder Skila. That's the word. So that's why the Torah specified Oiv Yudaini, Oiv Yudaini Mechashkem. So V'lo Yatsu, the Torah B'chal didn't have to give that as an example. Gevaldik lahakish leim v'loim melach ma Oiv Yudaini b'skilam b'feidish. That's the source. Af Mechashev is b'skilam. Now asks the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda says, "Very good. I'm not doing a shmuchin, but I have the answer." Azoi, the Gemara says, "You think you have the answer? I got a problem with you." But Rabbi Yehuda Navi, the opposite. You have Oiv and Yudaini. Oiv and Yudaini are two specific practices of witchcraft. Skila. The fact that Torah spoke both Oiv and Yudaini with Skila, now we have another problem. Shnei ksuvim, haboim ke'achad, emelamdim. The logic is because if God wanted something to be a source for others, that God should only write it once. The very fact that Hashem has to write something, Skila by Oiv and Skila by Yudaini, just write Skila by Oiv, just write Skila by Yudaini. Fakek, because one cannot learn, one is not a teacher. Nothing can be its student. So answers the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Zacharia, that Rabbi Zacharia Adam, how do we read over here? Rabbi Zacharia,
Ada Omro.
That Adot gesagt, that's it. That Kosova Rabbi Yehuda, Shnei Ksuvim Aboim Kiyachad, yes, Melamdim. Every time you learn in Shas, Hani Chalamanda Omar, Ava Lamanda Omar, We never know who the man the Amid is. So Ada was the one that was Megala, that Rabbi Yehuda is the Tana, maybe from here. That's why he didn't have a problem. It didn't bother him that Oiv and Yudoni are both explicitly Chayiv Skila, and he uses Oiv and Yudoni to teach you for all other dark arts practitioners. Now, Chevra Agadet, Omar Rabbi Yechon. Why do we call wizardry? Why do we call witchcraft? Why do we call it kishuv? Lama nikrashma kishafim. Because the word kishuv is a composite from the words kachash pamalia. Shamakhishin pamalia shalmaila. It contradicts the upper parliament. In other words, the way they practice kishuv is they are manipulating certain ruchnistic koiches, not the way God wants for them to be manifesting in this world, and that's how they affect the change. And we spoke a few days ago, Shita Sarambam, that Kishuv, the whole Kishuv is like Achiza Seinayim, and we also spoke that they explained that was Bisman Harambam. We're really going to have an underlying theme of how much power does Kishuv really have in our Gemara. He's saying that you're makrish pamal yashamayah, that you are actually, God wants things to go in one way, and that person, through applying a certain technique, could change things to go not the way God wants. Now, how can that really be? That really cannot be. So one way of learning the next line in the Gemara is that the Gemara is bringing a shita that argues with Rabbi Yechon. Other people's learn the next line is that since Kishuv is going against God's order, in order, the antidote that will nullify all Kishuv is the declaration, and not only verbal, but with your mind and heart, that Einoid Mulvadoi. Einoid Mulvadoi, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Filu Ledvar Kshafim. In other words, Kishuv is that the person is taking certain koiches that are ruchnias before they manifest the gashmis, and they're changing them. When a person says Einoid Mulvadoi, only God's will manifest. This will undo the Kishuv. Or there's a machlokes as to how much power this Kishuv really has. And as we'll see. It says in our story, there was a woman. The Rabbi Hanina, whether he was learning, whether he was engaged in business, he noticed a woman. She was trying to take some of the dust that was near his feet. And he understood that she's trying to take something of his to employ Kishuv on him. He did the Maisa from the Alter Rebbe. He didn't want Napoleon to get hold of even of the slippers, because people who practice the dark arts, and that was Napoleon, they would do it by getting something physical of you, not of you, of the person upon whom they're trying to harm. So Amar Allah, Rab Chanina was so not intimidated by her, because Enoid Movadoi, and he tells her, you know what? If you know what you're doing, knock yourself out. You know why? And therefore, I don't care how great you think you are. Me, you have no power. I ain't the Gemara of Amar Rabbi Yechanan. You see that? Because there is a koyach that they have. So answers the Gemara. If you have greater merit, if you live your life not only when you're trying to fight Kishuv, in a way that your life is a ein oid mulvadoi life, then Kishuv has no power over you at all. And that's another approach. The Rambam, who says Kishuv was just like a Chiza Sinai, because the Rambam lived a life of ein oid mulvadoi. Weiter, a lot more. Amar Rav Aivu bar Nagori, Amar Rav Chia bar Abba. We find something very interesting in Parshas Va'era, by the Makas Dam, for example. Right, so the Parai told Moshe that my magicianers, right, can do the same thing. The pasuk reads, "Vayasu chen chartum mitzrayim bilotehen." Bilotehen means through their magic. Then it says by the snake. That's a little bit before that makom that they did. They also made their staffs turn into a snake. Bilahatehem. Not the same. And the difference is, Bilotayim, if there's no hay after the Lamed, it's Maisa Shadim, it's a means of dark arts that you connect to the demons, and the demons do whatever it is you want to accomplish. And this is considered a lesser form of wizardry, which is easier to counter. But when it says Bila Hateyen, that's the pasuk by the snakes. And by the way, that's the only time it says by the Egyptians that they were able, Paro's magicians were able to do something without even employing demons. That trick of getting their stakes turn into snakes. When it says Bila Hateyen, that's called Ma'aseh Shafim. I'm not certain for what, but it's good to know. So there's using demons, but again, you'll see using demons is a lot easier, and it's a lot easier to undo the spell. And when you don't use demons, then it's a bigger koyach, but you counter it with Einoi Movad. And similarly, we find that by Bereshis, after Adam and Chava were expelled, so Hashem put the Chelef Hamis Hapeches Ves Lahat. See, hey after the Lamed. Lahat HaChelef Hamis Hapeches, and over there were no shadim making the sword turn. It was completely, there's a sword that's suspended and it's turning all on its own. Not that we see shadim, but even people that were to see shadim would see there's no shadim there. That's a higher form. Now, by the way, what happened there was God's doing, so it was completely permissible, as we'll see in a moment, employing Sefer Yetzirah, which is also tapping into the spiritual sources of things that are physical and changing them through Sefer Yetzirah. That's permitted. That's the permit. That's what we call that white magic. But if you're not using the Shemos of the Eibishter, which you have to have permission to use, then that's called Kishuv. So we have Maaseh Shedim and Maaseh Kishuv. Amar Abaye, how would you know what is being employed? The carpet amana, if the sorcerer needs a vessel to do the Kishuv. They say, I need to have my wand. Oy bazoi, he's employing a shape. Huh?
Or a long sleeve.
Or a long sleeve. No, it's long sleeve. So then shape. That means that a shvacha magician. To wake up in the morning, if someone doesn't need a vessel, a keli, nothing. That's worse. That's kshafim. Amar Abaye Hilkach, you should know that kshafim, Hilchais kshafim, thank you, is similar to Hilchas Shabbos. How? Just like by Shabbos, what's the rule on Shabbos? Chayiv, pater, muter. By Shabbos it means chayiv midoraisa, skila. Pater by Hilchas Shabbos means pater avolasim midrabanan. By kshafim it's not going to mean midrabanan. Achiza senayim is also midoraisa, pater from skila and muter. So here also, yesh, just like yesh mem b'shkila, v'yesh mehem pater avol. Here by kishuv it would mean biblically forbidden, but it's not penalized in a court. And there are certain type of what you might call you're practicing magic, which is completely mutter lechatchila. So let's go. If you actually change something, begashmi is through kishuv chayv skila. Again, according to Rashi, if you created an illusion that you did something very magical, then you're violating kishuv. But you're pater from skila. Avolasu. Also means midoiraisa. Just make it clear. Mutter lechatchila, what's permitted? What type of kishuv is mutter? So we just had this kid, Rav Chanina and Rav Oishia. They were learning the whole week in the Beis Medrash, and they had families. And in order to have shalom bayis, you come home. No one slept at home. People would go away for the whole week. You want to come home with a paycheck? No problem. So every Friday, Kol Ma'al Shavsa, every Friday, have a aski b'hilchas Yetzirah. They would learn Sefer Yetzirah, and through it. Umidri eagle tilsa, they would create from the dust of the earth the most delicate type of calf, and that's what they ate with Shabbos Kodesh, and that is muter lechatchila. Amar Rav Ashi chazino leila avua the Karna. Karna's father was a mechashiv. I once saw him the nuffets that he blew his nose, and you know what came out of his nostrils? And large silk materials came out of his nostrils. It's when you read this, you laugh because you look every of these shtusim, like you would think they would make up some new trick. All the tricks that the Chacham makes now, they had it. The only difference is that now it's an optical illusion. And again, we're following the Poiskin will say that the way it's done now is mutter. The father of Karna, he did kishuv, but there's a that kishuv that out of your nose comes the silk. Now, when it says regarding the lies, The Khartoumim told Paroi by the lies, ooh, this is already God's finger. Why didn't they say it by Dam and Sephardir? Because they were able to copy it. They were unable to copy it by the lies. So Omar, we're going to go with the version. Rabbi Elazar, Mikan, She'ena Sheikh Yocheli Boris, Beria Pochus Mechesa. Now we're going on the premise, first what we mentioned, that even the great Egyptians, Maisek Shafim was only to make a stick into a snake. For everything else that they were able to do, they needed shadim. When you are employing shadim to making changes in this world, you can't create something that's smaller than a barley corn. And since the lice were smaller than that, that was the first phenomena that they knew is not being done through Kishuv. So they acknowledge this is God's finger. Now, beautiful. We heard this when we learned in Cheder. But what are we learning right now? Really, there's an underlying discussion between Rabbi Yechanan and Rabbi Hanina, how much power does sorcery really have? And you're going to see over here. So he's implying that larger than a barley corn, through Kishuv, they can actually bring something into the world. And not everyone agrees to that. Amar Papa Amar Hu Elikim, by God, Afilu Kigam Lonami Limotzi Bari. Even if you're saying with larger, they could. Even if they're creating a camel, they really are not creating a camel. I had these chachamim then, like now, they uncovered the shmata and boom, there was a camel out of nowhere. It was there before. The camel was in the world. They figured out through Kishuv, through a demon. They got a demon. Now, no one knows how to do this now. Not the people that we know. They got a demon to bring a camel from over there over here, which is amazing. We're not allowed to do it. Amazing, not positive. But never creating out of nothing. Don't give them that much power. Maisa Shadim is to make a camel. No, you're not creating it. Michnevlei, you are gathering it. Verstehst? When it comes to a lice, a shade is even unable to conjure lice together because they're that little. Also, Maisa Elokim, just word it that way. But don't word it in a way where if it's larger than the So'ira, they're able to actually create. I saw the Arabs, they make themselves into everything. The Shaklein Lisafsira, that I saw him take a sword, the Gadye Lagamra, and I saw him chop up a camel. Do you imagine? And then the Ton of Lebe Tabla, he had a bell. The bell, the ringing of the bell, what do you call it? It took away the spell. There's a word for that. It unspelled it. Neutralized it. It dissolved the spell. So I saw him chop up a camel, and then the camel, after the bell, the camel is back a camel. So Amalei, so Rabchia tells Rav, same thing. They don't have that much power. Let me ask you a question. Do you think he really cut up the camel? Did you see blood? Labasar achi dam? Did you see his innards? Do you see his kishkes? No. Elo, what happened was all he did was he made a sleight of the hand. All the man did they cut a person in half. That's what they did, and nothing really happened. Another story. Zeiri ikla Alexandria shel Mitzrayim. And Nabach, and he bought a donkey. Now they practice kishuv there. Now there's an ability of turning a piece of wood into a donkey. Wood is a lot cheaper than donkey. So he paid money for a donkey, but he mata la'ashkuye maya. The moment he went to the water to give the donkey apples on this levase, the spell was dissolved, and the gamla, the donkey that he bought, turned back into what it really was, and that is duska nisa, which is a certain type of wood. And that's the rule you should know. That water dispels dark magic. So he wanted his money back. They tricked him. And they only gave him his money back because they knew he's Ze'idi. They knew that if he wouldn't do it, maybe he'll be bad advertisement. On the way, so they told him, if not that you are Ze'idi, you love Ze'idiyat, we would not give you back your money. But you know what? We're surprised about you. But don't you know that here in Alexandria, Shel Mitzrayim, that half of what you're seeing over here is all really just a kishuv? Like, why didn't you do due diligence? Me, Ika the Zavin, me the is there anyone that buys anything over here? And he doesn't do due diligence with me. You would sprinkle some water on it. I don't know what you would do to make sure that it is what it appears to be. Now look at the next story. Yana, it's getting late. Yana, Yana arrived at a certain inn. And Amalahu, Ashkemayim, please, he asked the hostess, I need some water. And she brought a special Talmudic drink called shatisa. Shatisa was water with flour. He was thirsty. They brought him shatisa. But he noticed, Yana noticed that the hostess, she was moving her lips. And he understood that she's employing a spell on the water. Now, I don't know if you saw this. I saw this from my teachers in Cheder. Whenever you have a cup of water, before you drink, you spill some of the water out. That's Sanhedrim Samachzayin. Because if there is someone put a spell in the water, whatever will leave the cup will manifest into something negative. He poured a little bit of water out and it turned into a scorpion, that drop of water. So he knew that she employed Kishu. Shada Purtamine, he threw some water out and Hava Akrabe, and it became a scorpion or scorpions. We mentioned in the intro, that's Rab Shmuel Munkes. That's the story over here. So basically, he was very smart. She poured water for him. He poured water for her. Because I know that you did something. Now, what did he do to the water? It doesn't say. But listen to what he did to her. So he tells her, I drank your water. It could even be that the reason why we pour some water out is because if there was kishuv in the water, all of that goes out on the drop of water that you removed. That's a shot. So Yana poured it out. She didn't notice that, and he drank off the cup. So nothing happened to him. With Shmuel Munkes, what happened was he made a bracha shahakar. And the Alter Rebbe, who was many miles away, Ruach Kodshay answered Amen. And that's why Shmuel Munkes did not get hurt from the kishuv in the water there. But he did a gavaldik thing back. Now you have to drink my cup of water. Ashke, she drank it, and Hava Hamra, she turned into a donkey. Now, 1 second, guys. He is not violating Kishuv, so I don't know, whatever he did was 100% kosher. Not only that, but here the Gemara is giving a little bit of a critique in between the lines. Rachba Salik L'Shuka. Now that he had a donkey, he rode the donkey into the marketplace. Problem was, the friend of this hostess, when she looked at the donkey, she noticed this is not a donkey. This is my friend. Oh my God. So Pashallah. So she, through Kishuv, dissolved the spell. So what happened? All of a sudden, Yanai is in the marketplace on the shoulders of a woman. That wasn't comfortable. So Chazia, everyone saw the Racha. In other words, don't do that. Or if you turn someone into a donkey, don't ride on them if they are the female gender. Like the final, if the second plague was that what came up was a frog in the singular and it covered the whole land of Egypt. How is that possible? One frog doesn't cover the whole land of Egypt. So here we have a machlokes. Rabbi Lazar says that it was tackled once a Fardeya, but every time they would beat it, it would spawn others. Right? Again, this is a greater level of zanes. But really, ketanoi. Rabbi Akiva says what we just mentioned. It was one Sefardeya. How every time they hit it, it multiplied and multiplied. This is not the first time, this is not the last time, but he says, Akiva, what are you doing teaching the homiletical agadah? No, sometimes it's kale means seas. Sometimes the lashon is kalech, from lake. Stop. Kale midav seas, speaking agadah. The lake etzel legoyim ba'ahalos. Go teach the hardest parts of halacha. You're telling me that it was such a miraculous thing? It wasn't that miraculous. There was one Sefardeya. Elama, whenever Sharka, whenever it croaked, like we learned before, like the demons gathered, the Sefardeya gathered the other Sephardim that were in Mitzrayim. Sharka, but really, at that level, now even though we're speaking about a Nes Min HaShamayim, this all has to do with how much does God want to work through nature? How much does God work? The makkahs will be al hateva, and the bottom line is that Hashem, Hu Elohim, and Einoi Mulvadoi.
Yeah.
Scheuer, Rabbi, Scheuer. Mazel tov, Mazel tov.
So,